Iran has shown the world what happens when one waterway passage becomes a weapon. Will Bab al-Mandab teach this lesson twice? Everyone knows about the Strait of Hormuz by now, the main leverage tool in the war on Iran by the US and Israel. But there's a second choke point, Bab al-Mandab, just a few hundred miles away, that carries almost as much significance. On Wednesday, July 22nd, Yemen's Houthis did something they hadn't done throughout 2 years of the genocide in Gaza. They hit 2 Saudi oil tankers, not Israeli-linked ships, with ballistic missiles, drones and cruise missiles, setting both ships on fire, a major escalation. They'd warned this was coming. 2 days earlier, the Houthis announced a full maritime embargo on Saudi Arabia through the Bab al-Mandab Strait, telling shipping companies that any vessel servicing Saudi ports would no longer be allowed safe passage. Is this the Houthis acting independently, in their own interest, pushing Saudi Arabia into retaliation to reawaken the dormant civil war in Yemen? Or is this connected to Iran, which had openly described Bab al-Mandab as leverage if Iranian infrastructure kept getting hit by the US and Israel?
A proxy does always have their interests, even if they act on the sponsor's behalf. It doesn't outrule their local objectives in any way, shape, or form. In fact, when they coincide, they're even more powerful, in which case is now happening, actually. The Houthi embargo against Saudi Arabia's maritime traffic is part and parcel of the US-Iran war and cannot be understood outside of that. So the timing also suggests that the Iranians have kept this strategic lever for a time when they need it most. The only intact, resilient card that the IRGC has is the Houthis.
Now rewind 10 days, as this is where the current escalation actually started. On Monday, July 13th, the runway at Sanaa International Airport, the Houthi-held Yemeni capital, was struck. The Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council, based in Aden and backed in Riyadh, claimed responsibility, but the Houthis blamed Saudi Arabia directly, partly because the PLC has little air force of its own and because of the tight cooperation between Yemen's internationally recognized government and Riyadh. Why the strike? An Iranian aircraft carrying a Houthi delegation home from Khamenei's funeral in Tehran was landing in Yemeni territory, violating a long-standing Saudi-enforced ban on Iranian planes in the country. When the Sanaa runway was struck, the plane was diverted and landed instead in Hodeidah, on Yemen's Red Sea coast. Axios reported that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman asked US President Donald Trump for a green light in a phone call on Friday, July 10th, 3 days before the strike, and got it, suggesting Riyadh wanted US political cover before escalating. The Houthis responded by firing missiles at Abha airport in southern Saudi Arabia. Saudi air defenses said they intercepted them. Since then, Saudi's southern airspace has been closed, and a rhetorical war has escalated that hadn't been employed since the 2022 truce, culminating now in the tanker strikes and blockade.
There is a risk that we walk that escalation ladder because of miscalculation, misreading, but also mistargeting. And for the Houthis, this was a declaration of war. Saudi Arabia, of course, now you have few priorities. You know, when you talk about Vision 2030, you cannot live next to a ticking bomb throughout these times. And the second, Saudi Arabia has emerged now as the region's primary bypass of Hormuz. So it has also that obligation of trying to sustain global energy markets. Oman will continue, and the Office of the Special Envoy will continue their attempts to de-escalate in one way, you know, to avoid a spillover, because this is not only about Yemen and the Red Sea, but it's also about marking a new phase in the US-Iran war.
To explain its global commercial relevance, here is Bab al-Mandab in numbers. It carries roughly 10 to 12% of global seaborne trade in normal conditions, as it's the only sea approach to the Suez Canal from the south. Oil transit through it averaged around 4.2 million barrels a day in 2025, but that was down sharply from 9 million barrels per day before the Red Sea crisis, when carriers started rerouting due to the Gaza-related Houthi attacks. For comparison, Hormuz moves roughly 20.9 million barrels a day, about a fifth of global oil consumption, most of it heading to Asia. Now, both choke points have seen traffic drop sharply in the same 24-hour window. Hormuz crossings down 31% day on day, and Bab al-Mandab down 34%.
Saudi Arabia will continue to act as the government of Yemen with strategic patience until they run and exhaust all possible pathways of diplomacy that they need to act, because the cost of inaction would be the equivalent of appeasement and the equivalent of enabling malign and hostile and disruptive patterns, not only to their immediate geographies, but also to global economic energy markets specifically. If the Houthis fail to de-escalate the risk of renewed conflict within Yemen in a strategic pathway that breaks the stalemate, no peace and no war, might be on the horizon in the next weeks and months, perhaps.